and freshly made salads. Warm yourself up with rich, tasty coffee and espresso drinks, or cool yourself down with a cold draft beer. Bakery, market, and eatery. That's Two Fish Baking at Stewart's Point, a destination of deliciousness. Find out more at twofishbaking.com or call 707-785-2011. That's 707-785-2011.
Good morning and welcome to KGUA in Molalla 88.3 FM. I am your host today for this radio show and podcast. I'm Leigh Anne Lindsey, and I've got a fun show lined up today with our famous author and friend, Roni McFadden, who's waiting on Zoom here with us, and we're live on YouTube if you want to watch. First, though, we need to get into some local announcements, and then we're going to bring Roni on the show. And we have coming up this Saturday at the Point Arena Lighthouse, they're going to be doing a lens tour, and that is a fun thing to do if you've never done it before. It is going to be led by some volunteer docents at the Point Cabrillo light. Oh, it's at the Point Cabrillo light station. My apologies. My first inclination was to think right here in Point Arena when I saw Point, but it's up just north of Mendocino, and that's the Point Cabrillo Lighthouse. And that will be starting from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. tomorrow. And for contact information, call 707-937-6123. There is an art exhibit right here in the Sea Ranch at Linden Design Gallery on Annapolis Road, and that is featuring the watercolor paintings of artist Karen Fine, and that is going to be 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. And that is also by appointment if you'd like, if it's going to be after 11 to 5 tomorrow on Saturday. And we went to see the great exhibit last night at the Sea Ranch Lodge of artist right here in the Sea Ranch called Joe, forgot his last name, but it's wonderful. It's about these houses and the trees of Sea Ranch and how he perceives them. And I'll get you that name, his last name, and his contact information too. There is an art opening at Fort Ross called the Zoologist, and it's featuring local artist Suzanne Deneuve, and it celebrates the diversity of the planet's ecosystems through oil paintings and poetic verse. And that's going to be with a collaborator, her son, Timothy Kelly, a longtime science educator and volunteer with the Fort Ross Conservancy. That's 2:30 to 4:30 Saturday at the Fort Ross Historic State Park. And for more information, you can go to info or email info@fortross.org, call 847-3437, area code 707. And this is the Up in Elk at the Elk Artist Collective, the second Saturday reception, and that's going to be of the art of Jane Kasner Mothersill, and that's running through the month of April from 2 to 4 p.m. in Elk. And you can call 877-1128 for more information on that. And then there is another opening reception at the Dolphin Gallery, and it's our dear friend Lorraine Matheson and her works called Encaustic Art, Exploring the Seen and the Unseen, and that runs 2 to 4 p.m. And that's going to be till April the 30th at the Dolphin Gallery. And at the Gualala Arts Center, we have the Chamber Music Series that continues, and that's going to be 4 p.m. on Sunday at the Gualala Arts Center. And go to gualalaarts.org for more information. It's featuring pianist Ilya Yakushev, and that's 4 o'clock on Sunday. Thursday, coming up at the Sea Ranch Lodge, we have Sunset and Jazz, so that's something not to miss with Harrison Ford and others. There's going to be an acoustic guitarist, Greg Blunt, and a Bay Area Latin percussionist, Phil Montalvo, along with Harrison Goldberg, who's the saxophonist. And there is one other thing I forgot to mention, and that's the wine sampling event on Sunday, and that is going to be up at Shindig. That's right where the old Ranch Cafe used to be. Melinda from Birdsong Clinic and her husband Carl run this new pop-up restaurant event place. They're going to be sampling the wines with Derek Trowbridge of Old World Winery, and that's 2 to 5 p.m. on Sunday. And that will do it for our local events here in the area. And Roni McFadden is here with us. I'm just going to tell you a little bit before we introduce her about her background and our connection. We both have a connection to Ridgewood Ranch up in Mendocino County, which is the home of Seabiscuit. And there are 5,000 acres left of the original 16,000 acres. And my family owns some of that property. She and her husband owned some of it before they moved to Idaho, that is. But she was a long time Mendocino County resident. And now she is a mother of 4, a grandmother of 16. She grew up in Altadena, California, and now lives in Hayden, Idaho with her husband of 49 years, John. And during her time in Mendocino County, Roni had a career at Redwood Valley Equine, which was the horse veterinarians who cared for the horses at Ridgewood for over 25 years. And through that connection, she was able to write and publish her first book. And that was Josephine, A Tale of Hope and Happy Endings. And it's a children's book about the great-granddaughter of Seabiscuit. And this young foal becomes orphaned at the age of 4 days old, and the book follows how she is finally accepted by a surrogate mare. Anyway, all the proceeds from that book are still going to the Seabiscuit Therapeutic Writing Program, and the documentary on which I'm working, Seabiscuit's Legacy, eventually the net part of the net profits will go to the same program, as well as to the Seabiscuit Heritage Foundation, which is our fiscal sponsor. And guess who sits on the board of that foundation but Roni McFadden. So we have a lot of ties and things in common, especially horses. And one of our loves, which also led to the writing of her other book, and many others may to come, but a great book called The Longest Trail. It's both in written and audio form on Amazon, and you can order it from any bookseller. The Longest Trail being made into a movie now, and she talks in there about many of her experiences packing into the high country of the Sierras. And when I was young, I packed into the Rocky Mountains. So we have a lot to talk about as far as packing into the mountains and caring for horses. Good morning, Roni. Welcome.
Good morning. Good to see you.
It's really good to see you. What's the weather like up there in Idaho?
We actually had a couple of days of sun. The snow in my front yard and backyard is gone. Hadn't seen my lawn since last November. So, but today it's going to rain. So it changes by the minute here.
It's raining here today, as a matter of fact. We're all fogged in. It's very wet and damp, but for this coming Easter weekend, we are supposed to get some sunshine again and warmer weather, finally.
Good. Good.
We've just been slammed, ever since the end of December, especially January with the cyclone bomb storm. And
Yeah.
I haven't been riding my horse very much, but I have been doing a lot of care.
Yep, me too. I've ridden once since last October, and that was just a few weeks ago.
Mine was a couple of months, well, maybe a month ago, but same here. Yeah.
Yeah.
So your horse, let's hear about your horse that you have now.
Romeo. Romeo is the most beautiful horse I've ever owned. He is very photogenic. He is a Leopard Appaloosa.
Beautiful.
Which the state horse of Idaho is the Appaloosa, developed by the Nez Perce Indians. And so I just, it's like I've gone home, gone home to Idaho where my horses love. Anyway, he's a great horse. He's almost 22 years old. He came to me through me working at the vet. A client had him, and one of my pack station horses from the 60s was a Leopard Appaloosa. So I had always had, a place in my heart for spots. And I raised Dalmatians even because I love those spots. And so she offered him to me, and I've had him now for since 2013, I think.
And he was your first horse after about a hiatus of what, 18 years?
18 years, yeah.
Same
Yeah,
here
18
with
years.
my registered paint horse. I had been actually a little longer than that, like
Uh-huh.
2 years without a horse.
Yeah.
Grew up.
After my last one got put down, I didn't get another one, and because I worked for the vet, I was always busy, but I also had multiple friends who had horses and I could ride anytime I wanted. I just didn't have a lot of time to ride, but I never expected to own another horse until Romeo just kind of fell into my life. And now I'm glad he did. I mean, he's my life.
Right. I know. I really wanted to have a horse in my life, but I too, I had been living up on the ranch, part of the old Ridgewood Ranch, which is our family's ranch now. And that's when the horse I had trained at the age of 11, a Palomino quarter horse, who is, get this, descended from War Admiral. I found that out way later, when I started working on this documentary.
So
but
related to Seabiscuit in a way.
So in a way, but anyway, she stayed with me for 26 years. But one night up there, it had rained heavy and she had slipped and fallen against a tree and wasn't able to get up. Well, she colicked and we were unable to really save her from there, even though we tried all night long. So we had to finally put her down. And really after that, I didn't have a horse. That was the last time I had one too, until Jax. But Romeo, now I want to go to the time where you went through the fires and what you had to go through to save him from the smoke inhalation.
Oh, those fires it was 2017, October 2017, and our house sits up above the Ridgewood Ranch up in the hills, and Romeo was boarded down in Redwood Valley, and about a mile away from my office. And we were in bed, and all of a sudden there's a knock on the door, or no, the guy was in the driveway honking, and he said, "Fire, fire." And we looked out, we couldn't see anything. He said, "By the quarry." So we got in our car and we drove up to kind of a lookout before it drops down to our house. So we couldn't see anything at the quarry, but we could see a big orange glow to the south. And as we were driving back to the house, the lady that owns the place where Romeo was called me and said, "Ronnie, come get the horses, come get the horses. I can't," she was 80 years old. She had already left with her dog and she had one horse and I had Romeo. So by some miracle, my horse trailer was at my house, because if it hadn't been, we would have never gotten through the CHP checkpoints. But we ran home, hooked it up, got to the highway there by Black Bart Rock. That's where our road went up into to our subdivision, and CHP had the highway blocked right there. And we said, we have to go. We got horses down in Redwood Valley we have to go get. And he said, "You're going at your own risk. The highway's on fire on both sides." And boy, it was.
It was.
So then we get down to the fire department area in Redwood Valley, and the sheriff's had it blocked off there. And we said, "Got horses up on Colony Drive." They said, "Get in and out as fast as you can." So we drove to the place and we drove up the long dirt road where there's a vineyard, and the fire was coming down the hill right on the other side of that vineyard. Get to where Romeo was, and the barn's got the light on, and there's two horses standing in there and like, "Save us." The wind was blowing embers and it was horrible. And then
nerve-wracking, especially getting them into the trailer under those circumstances.
Well, and the big issue was Yankee, the other horse, had not been loaded in a trailer for over 10 years.
Oh.
I thought, do I load Romeo first? And we just led them out, and Yankee just jumped right into the trailer. So got them out, and we had to go to the fairgrounds where all the horses were being taken. And then I kind of helped spearhead things with the Humane Society and rescue organizations. We got feed delivered, just donations came out of the woodwork. And we ended up having 185 horses there at the fairgrounds.
I remember I saw you there when
Yeah.
I came to actually deliver some supplies we had gotten from Petaluma,
Mhm.
because I had to take a couple of dogs down with a
Right.
few of the rescuers to
Right.
them to rescue, and then they just loaded up my truck with all these supplies, which we
Yeah.
brought back. And then I stopped by the fairgrounds there, and what a huge operation that
It
was.
really was. And then I spent the next few days going back into the fire area with John Tilley, and bringing out animals that were still in there because the owners couldn't return. They had it blocked off for almost 8 days, I believe, before people could return. And so we were bringing animals out. We brought a little herd of Navajo churro sheep out. We brought horses and ponies out, and it was rewarding, but it was devastating to see.
It was.
Yeah.
If you're just tuning in, you're listening to the voice of Roni McFadden. And if you're on YouTube, you can see us. We are live on YouTube, and this is KGUA in Wallala 88.3 FM. We're also streaming around the world at kgua.org. Just click listen live at the top of the page from any internet device, and you can listen in. I'm Leigh Anne Lindsey, the host today. And Roni McFadden is an author, horsewoman, former veterinarian tech, and she is talking with me today about horses. And also, eventually, we're going to get into talking about packing into the high country with our horses. And this is we're going down the path of, some of the things that you go through when you are a horse owner. Oh, and Roni, when there's any emergency up here in Northern California, there's Cowboy 911 or 611. Which one is it?
I think it's 611.
611. But they have a whole organization network of people with trailers and trucks and who get mobile and go into action to help during emergencies, especially fires.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, back at the fairgrounds, you guys had this massive operation. And then what happened with Romeo?
Romeo got sick. That was October. And I want to say he started coughing in November, and then by December he just was not himself. He was coughing. He didn't have a lot of energy, and we couldn't quite pinpoint it. Had several vet calls to figure it out. They would put him on antibiotics, and then he was fine. And then as soon as they quit, he was sick again. Just not himself. The long and the short of it is, I finally in April, so 6 months later, took him to UC Davis, and he had abscesses in his lungs caused by a disease called pigeon fever, or Coeur pseudotuberculosis is the proper name for it. It's a cattle disease, and it lives in the ground. And during drought conditions, it usually pops its ugly head up, and it's spread by flies that pick up the bacterium in the ground, and then they'll go and bite an animal, and they introduce the bacteria into the skin, and then it forms a big old abscess. And it's usually a very benign disease. It's just ugly and disgusting to deal with because you've got these huge abscesses on the exterior. And it's nicknamed pigeon fever because that's usually where a horse would get bit, is on the chest, sort of puff up and look like a pigeon.
We were just talking about that yesterday.
Right. So there was some pigeon fever going around. There were a couple horses at the fairgrounds that had it, that we isolated. But somehow Romeo got it in his lungs, which internal pigeon fever happens only about 2% of the time. And of that 2%, it's 100% fatal if not treated. And even if treated, it's got a 40% mortality rate.
So it really wasn't from the smoke inhalation. It was being near the other horses, perhaps.
Something, we don't know.
During that sequestration, you don't know for sure.
Nobody knows how he got it, because it was going around. He just never had any abscesses on the outside. And can they breathe in the bacterium? Evidently, so we don't know. But
what was the treatment then? That
treatment then was he was at Davis for 4 days. They shaved his sides to ultrasound him, and that's when they found the abscesses. The first thing they did was take x-rays of his lungs. And you know how lung x-rays are usually black, you see the air. Well, his were just white with, infection and stuff. So then they did an ultrasound. They shaved his sides, which a white horse having his sides shaved is usually very pink. And then he had all these dots, all these black spots, and the vets were fooling around playing connect the dots. Anyway, so he got this
a little levity in the very dire.
There was a lot of, and everything. So then they sent me home with 3 different drugs that he had to have twice a day. And they said, well, usually you have to be on them for a couple of months. And he ended up being on them for 7.5 months.
Wow.
If I did not work for the vet to get those drugs at cost, I could have never saved him because it costs a lot of money.
Being at Davis is costly.
Yeah, I asked Dr. Madigan why the mortality rate was 40% with treatment, and the number 1 reason was cost, and the number 2 reason was client. I can't think of the word, but them doing what they're supposed to do. So, right. I twice a day he got those drugs, and several of the people that were my friends that lived in Redwood Valley helped me if I couldn't get down there because I live 12 minutes away. And so after 8 months, I was able to ride him again. And he is a happy, healthy horse now, though he still gets pretty winded on the trail because he's got scar tissue in his lungs, but he's a goer and he's amazing.
I remember the videos and the photos you sent to me when he had gotten to that point, and seeing him, run around with the tail held up and his head held high, and you could tell he was snorting and happy, just back in his element.
I always tell people, and I made a video of his life up to that point, and at the end of the video, one of my favorite things to say is people thought that I needed him, but in the end, God thought that he needed me. And that's kind of the way it ended up. I don't know if anybody else would have gone to the expense and trouble to save him. Most horses just get put down.
How old is he now?
He will be 22, May 15th. That's
still young.
Yeah, so this all happened when he was 18 when all this happened. So.
Yeah, my horse was 28 when we had to, put her down only because of the colic, and it had really been traumatic for her by the time we had found her. But she, before that, was in prime condition. I mean, she looked fabulous, and I rode her all the time up into the mountains there at, by Ridgewood Ranch. Mm-hmm. Very steep terrain, and she could go anywhere. So, and that's the way Romeo looks too. He's got that, robust looking, physical, exterior.
Yeah.
And presence.
He's a really solid, sturdy, tough horse. Yeah. And the vets at Davis were remarking that he was very stoic. He did not look or appear or act as sick as he really was.
A lot of horses are like this, right? Yeah. They don't really, you have to really be watching very closely their behavior to understand.
Yeah.
I mean, you were a vet tech for so long.
Well, that's why come Christmas time, I knew that something just wasn't right because he just didn't have the energy. Before we went to Davis, the day before, I have a friend there in Willits who's a Pomo elder, Sterling Wright. He came and
I've seen Sterling.
Sterling, he's a dancer.
Yep, at the opening of the new hospital.
Yeah, he's a very, very dear friend of mine, and he came and gave Romeo a Pomo blessing the day before we were going to Davis. And I've got wonderful pictures. He'd never been around horses. I've got a picture of him head to head with Romeo praying. And after he was done, he said, "This is a warrior horse." He's a warrior horse. And so that kind of has stuck with me. And when I had a portrait done of him, he's got feathers in his hair, and the artist, not knowing this story, named the portrait Warrior Horse.
I love it. And well, the Native American history and theme runs through your book, The Longest Trail.
Yeah.
And this could be a good tie-in to a book you created about being up in the high country and the experiences that you had, all because of a difficult circumstance that led you to work with a fellow who had an operation like this. Why don't you tell us that story, Roni?
Well, I kind of was a hard teenager. I was 14. My mom and I were butting heads, and I loved horses. In fact, I had bought my first horse at the age of 12 with my babysitting money. And so horses were my life. And whenever I would have an argument with my mom, I would just get on my horse and go ride. Well, after we moved to a new house, there was a gentleman I was introduced to down the street that had a stable full of horses. His name was John Slaughter. And so I started working for him, brushing and cleaning and just doing anything I could do to not be home and to be where horses were. And he just kind of took me under his wing and became my mentor, became a father figure I'd never had. And he gave me more and more responsibility with the horses. And he leased a pack station up in the high Sierras, it was about 4 hours away from Altadena, the Altadena, Pasadena area where I grew up. And so I went on my first pack trip with him at the age of 14 and a half, I think, and fell in love with that country and just knew that I was born 100 years too late and, just wanted to be there all the time. And that led to me actually working for him, not only at the stables, but at the pack station all summer long. And then when I was 16, I actually lived up there all winter long by myself for 2 winters, so 16 and 17. And I stayed there all summer, all by myself with my dogs and probably 6 or 8 horses that he left up there to winter up there.
That's a lot of responsibility for a young woman at 16 and 17.
Yeah, I don't think it would happen today. This was in the 60s, so
right. Different world. Right. And what was that feeling when you were going on that first trip into the mountains? What was that?
I had never been on anything like that. I mean, I rode horses up the canyon near our house, which was at the foot of the San Gabriel Mountains. So it was mountainy, but going up into that, so the pack station was on the desert. It's on the east side of the Sierras. It's 25 miles south of Lone Pine. So you go up this 3-mile long dirt road from 395, and nestled right at the foot of the hills was a cabin and some corrals and a tack room. And then you rode, it was a non-motorized trail, so horses and hiking only, 18 miles up into the high country at the, we had campsite at the South Fork of the Kern River. And then about a mile beyond that, there were 2 cabins, 2 old log cabins that were built in the 1905 or something like that.
How long would it take you to do the 18 miles?
Usually took about 5 or 6 hours.
I would think so.
Yeah. Coming out, we would come out a lot faster than we went in, of course.
Right. Well, you're going up.
Yeah. There's a lot of stopping and resting.
And resting the horses,
Yeah.
right?
So I became his chief wrangler and cook, for the hunters that we would take in or the families we would take in.
What would be some of those trips? People would come up and do what?
Well, they would, like the hunters would come up and we'd take them in and they'd go off, we'd go up into the high country, and then I would be in charge of cooking their meals and taking care of the horses, saddling the horses up. They'd be gone all day pretty much hunting. For the families, we would take them in. There was the river they could swim in, or they would go on day rides or day hikes or just play in the high country, with no not a care. There's no electronics or anything.
It's a good way to disconnect today, but back then they didn't have those devices.
Right.
They, more outdoor and in nature.
Yeah.
So when you were there caring for the horses, what kind of responsibility was that from dawn to dusk?
Well, I would get up early, go feed them, and then I'd go in and cook breakfast, and then I'd go out and saddle up whatever was going to be used that day, and make sure that we usually had a rider assigned to a certain horse, so it wasn't, this is going to be your horse for the next 5 days. So they kind of developed a relationship with their horse, and
It's
and so
important.
then they'd go away and ride off, and if they didn't come back until dusk, then I would go out and on saddle and dry them off and turn them back out to the pasture. We didn't take hay in very much because there was a pasture up there. We did take grain in so that they would have a little bit high energy food. And then I go in and cook. Do dishes, and it's funny, my life didn't really change after I got married.
So when we talked earlier about the Native American theme, how did that come into play while you were up there in the high country?
Well, where the pack station is, most likely was a major gathering place for the natives. The Paiute and Shoshone are the local tribes that are there. There's a grinding stone. There's a picture of it on the front of my book. That grinding stone is the size of a large desk, and its holes are about 12 inches deep. There's obsidian chips everywhere. It was obviously a major meeting place, maybe for tribes coming out of the high country or tribes traveling north and south. It was an ideal spot for them all to meet. And just sitting or standing by that grinding stone just runs chills up your spine.
Wow.
It's amazing. The spirits there in those mountains and on that desert are sometimes intense.
Focal point of energy, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Well, if you're just tuning in, we're listening to Roni McFadden, author of The Longest Trail. These stories are part of this book, and this book is being made into a movie in the near future. We don't know when exactly, but it will be made into a movie.
It's in development.
It's in development. Whatever else you can say about that. I know a lot of it we have to stay hush hush.
Yeah.
But The Longest Trail is a book you can get on Amazon or any bookseller. They can order it. And it is an award-winning nonfiction book of this time in her life, back into the mountains and the stories she's got to tell. And I really like the audio version too, Roni. And just wanted to let people know you can watch us on YouTube anytime after or right now. We are on air at 88.3 FM, online at kgua.org, and later it will be uploaded to SoundCloud. This show will repeat at 1 o'clock. And I'm Leigh Anne Lindsey, your host today here at KGUA in Wallala. And this is Roni McFadden. And she was a Mendocino County resident for many years. Her home was part of the original home of Seabiscuit, like my family has a portion of that too. We have a lot in common with our horses. And when I packed, it was into the Rocky Mountains when I was in my early 20s. I had come from East Texas, big, huge, flat ranch out there that was about 10,000 acres. And when I was young, I'd just go all day long, just go way, way, way far away. No cell phone. Nobody knew where I was, but this is the way my life was when I was young. And then around 15, I'm almost 16, I moved with my older sister to Aspen, Colorado. And the first job I had there was guiding trail rides for an outfit in Snowmass, which is just outside of Aspen, and guiding, tour groups up and down the trails. We had different trails we'd take them on depending on the hour and the time that they had paid for. But that got me into a love for going up into the mountains. And I had 2 horses that I brought with me from Texas, one of which was the Palomino quarter horse I'd mentioned earlier. And we would go out for a week at a time up from Snowmass and then over to the Aspen area and the Aspen-Snowmass Wilderness area, then down by the Maroon Bells was one of my favorite trips. And that's a beautiful, iconic view of Aspen, the 3 Maroon Bells with the lake and the aspen trees that flow down beside it. And we'd have our trailer parked there ready to put the horses in when we got down. We packed, with the canvas bags on the back of our horses. We didn't have any other pack horse with us, which would have helped, but I was a very slim young girl at that time, and we could pack more weight on the horse. And we'd take our, we had small, backpacks, shovels, whatever we needed to take with us. And you always had to take emergency gear for the horses in case something happens to them. And one time something serious happened. A horse that I was riding brushed by a rock and it slit open his hind quarters. And we had to hold him while I sewed him up by my own hand.
Yep.
These are things that you have to do. I mean, you've got many stories. Let's get back to you.
I did that a few times too. So packing, John he designed these pack saddles that went made of canvas that went behind your saddle.
Right.
And their proportions held a 5-gallon square trash can. And so he put these 5-gallon square trash cans in on each side behind the saddle, and then he filled them about half full with grain. And then the rider could put all their stuff on top of that. And then, of course, they had sleeping bags and stuff on top of that. Yeah. He always had one pack horse. We never had mules up there. He always had one pack horse that he would pack all the incidentals on. And either I would lead them or John most of the time walked in leading the pack horse. So that was how we did it, with his specially designed canvas bags with the 5-gallon plastic waste baskets.
I love it.
Yeah, so there were a few times that I sewed a horse up with fishing line.
You had fishing line.
Line.
The kit I had was the kind that you get at the hotel. It was one of those small ones, and yet it worked. Yeah. The vet said, "Hey, it worked. You saved that horse's life."
Yeah.
And I carried a shovel with us that collapsed.
Mm-hmm.
And one time we got up and the snow was so deep across the trail, and we were thinking, well, maybe there's no snow beyond that going up the mountain. Well, we were wrong, but we still shoveled our way into a certain part. We camped for the night, and then we realized we couldn't go any further. We had to return the way we'd come.
Yeah.
But that's just one of many things that you find up in the high country.
Yep, that's right.
And it was August.
Yep. I have video of one snowstorm that came upon us really rapidly that wasn't expected. Everybody's rapidly trying to get the horses ready to get out of there before it really stormed.
Oil slicker. We had those oil slicker coats.
Yep.
And hats. We didn't wear helmets back then, but we
wear helmets, and I have a hard time wearing a helmet now.
I hear you.
I was out riding this last, couple weeks ago, and I put pictures on, and my daughter had bought me my oldest daughter bought me a helmet 2 Christmases ago, and she saw that picture. She said, "Mom, where is your helmet?" And I'm like, "Oh, busted."
It has come in handy a couple of times, I must say.
Yeah,
it saved my head. Yep. When I found myself on the ground.
Yep.
Which was hard to do when I was younger, but we're older. But going back to your experiences there in the high country of the Sierras, and you're a young girl and you're there on your own. Mm-hmm. And there's one experience I remember with a mountain lion. That's the one I want to hear about.
Okay. So we had taken a group of hunters in, and oftentimes we had to make 2 trips if another group was arriving. So we had taken a group in, and I was on Brownie, who was my American saddlebred horse, who kind of had a jig to his walk, and was afraid of everything. And so I had gone in with the first group, and then I rode back out, and by that time it was dusk, to take a group out. And my plan was to go back up the next morning, but I just felt kind of energized. I took a quick cold shower at the pack station, and Brownie got some food, and then I saddled him back up, and we went back up the trail. It was a full moon, which is the only reason I did it. And we're just going on up the hill, and when you get up to the summit, it kind of flattens out for a mile or two before it drops down into the river canyon there. And so we're up on top. I got off of Brownie to just kind of look around and take in my surroundings. The moon was close enough that you felt you could touch it.
Oh, beautiful.
And it was just daylight. And so I thought, okay, let's go. And I decided to walk for a while because it was just amazing.
Magic.
So I had the lead rope hooked over my shoulder, and I'm out in front, and we're just kind of walking along. And all of a sudden, boom, I am on my butt in the middle of the trail. And I don't know what happened, except that my horse came to an abrupt stop. I turned around and looked at him, and his eyes were just as big as saucers. And I thought, what is going on? And I turned around, and probably 10 feet in front of me was a mountain lion whose eyes were as big as saucers that we had come upon. And I could feel his breath. That's how close we were. I could feel his breath. I could smell him. And it was just an instant. And then there was kind of a flurry off the side of the trail, like a little whirlwind of dirt that went across between us. And I'm watching it. And when I looked back, the mountain lion was gone.
Connection, the animal, everything gone.
Yep.
Wow.
And my horse was
magic
like just
scene.
snorting and like, get me out of here.
Do something.
Yeah, so that was pretty intense spiritual experience.
That's
at the age of 16.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And then the time that you also had to do something that was difficult for you. There was no one else there, and you had to take on a big responsibility at a young age.
Yeah. Ooh, it's hard to talk about. His name was Maverick. He was in Appaloosa, and we were on the desert, and so I was in the cabin, and it was a really stormy night, and thunder, and just lots of noises outside that I didn't go investigate because it was a stormy night. And the next morning I went out to feed, and all the horses came up to the feeders except for Maverick, who was standing over there, and he had a broken leg. Oh. And it was obvious that it was broken, and I'm there alone. There's no phones, there's nothing, and there's no veterinarian to go call, and they're
in obvious distress.
Yeah, he was just standing there just pleading, and it was just, I don't know how long it took me to figure out what to do. Just the whole thing is just a fog. Mm. But I remembered that my rifle was in the cabin. So I went and got the rifle, and I kind of leaned it up against the fence, and I put all the other horses in another corral. And then I knew what I had to do. I had to shoot that horse to put him out of his misery.
I can't even imagine.
And I don't know how long I stood there. Like I say in the book, I describe it pretty vividly how I remember it in the book. And it was like I raised the gun and somebody pulled the trigger. And I know that the ancestors helped me pull the trigger. I sat down just going, what am I supposed to do? Right. And so then I did that. And afterwards, when I opened the gate, every horse walked up to him and sniffed him. almost like single file, like a funeral, receiving line going to pay their respects. It was amazing.
That's
I was
very unique with horses too,
I was sobbing. I was sobbing so hard. It was just.
Good.
And then I went and afterwards I just went and sat down in the middle of the road. The road came up right between the cabin and the corrals, and I just sat down in the middle and just continued crying. And pretty soon, dust from a vehicle's coming up the road. And at that point, the sheriff would come up and check on me. He knew I was there alone. He'd come and check on me a couple times a week. Here he came. Gets out, sees me just sobbing, looks over the corral. Come on, let's go get a cup of coffee inside, and he took care of all the details. We had to actually burn the body there because there was no one to haul it off or.
Wow.
Yeah. It was pretty.
Tell us about that sheriff, a little bit about who he was.
Well, he was of Paiute descent, and here I'd been taking in all of this native stuff, and he had some books for me, and his grandmother was pureblood, and he taught me a lot about the local natives. And he felt that I had an inner sense and connection to them, so he shared a lot of stuff with me.
That's the voice of Roni McFadden. If you're just tuning in, we're talking about a story that comes out in her book, The Longest Trail. It's been on the market for many years now. It's won many awards. It's being made into a movie, and it's about her experiences being up in the high country in the Sierras when she was a young girl. It's just a beautifully done book, Roni. I mean, you've poured your heart and soul into that book and into the experiences you describe. It's a beautiful way of taking you through these summers that you experience and the winters that you lived through. I'm Leigh Anne Lindsey, the host today. I too am a horsewoman from a long time ago, since I was 2 actually, and grew up on a big Texas ranch. We used to raise quarter horses, and we had a stallion. We had hundreds of head of horses, and I trained my first horse at 11, and then became a Rocky Mountain trail guide at the age of 16. When Roni was 16, she was up there as a pack guide, and I packed with my friends into the Rocky Mountains, as I was saying before. And you're listening to KGUA in Wallala, 88.3 FM. We're online at kgua.org, and we're live on YouTube right now, which you can watch anytime. And Roni, there's another experience in your book that I found very familiar after doing all the trail guide events that I did when I was 16 and 17. And that, you get to learn about a lot of different personalities who come and their levels of experience with horses. And some will say they know more about riding than they do. And there's one experience where you're up on this very difficult part of a trail, and these trails up in the mountains can get very tricky and narrow. Describe that scene for us.
Well, that actually was the one time that I went on a pack trip that wasn't in the high Sierras. This was up at Big Sur. We went up to Big Sur on this. These hunters were going pig hunting, and the trail, there's a little pull out from Highway 1, and you just unload and you start riding up this trail that is just, you look down and think you can throw a rock in the ocean.
Right.
So we go up, and then we got up close to the top, and there was one part that was really crumbly, and Jim Slaughter, who was John's son, was leading the group, and then I was in the middle and John was at the back. And at this one spot, Jim said, okay, I want everybody to get off your horse. We're going to lead them across this spot. And this one rider, oh, I can ride across it, I'm fine. And he starts to ride across it. He was on a horse named Blaze, and the whole thing kind of gave away, and him and Blaze went tumbling down this hill through fir trees, and I mean, they tumbled down so that we couldn't see them. And you just heard the rider kind of got thrown off right at the top, so we were able to get him. But the horse, you just kept hearing it, trees breaking and branches breaking, and so John came up, and we all got, we were all off anyway. We're holding our horses, and John asked Jim to get the gun. Let's go, I'm going down. Get the gun. I'm going to have to shoot him, I'm sure. And he went down after that horse, and it was just quiet. Nobody heard anything for the longest time.
You're all waiting for that sound.
We're all waiting for the gunshot. And then all of a sudden we hear this scrambling, hoof scrambling coming back up. And here comes John leading Blaze back up. And it was a miracle. And he said when he reached him, the horse was sitting in a dog-like position about 10 feet from a sheer drop off. So it was like, I'm not going any further. And he had scrapes and scratches and a bruised hip, and he was hurting, but it was pretty much superficial. And the hunter had a cut down his head, like a razor blade had just sliced him. And so that was that trip. We ended up taking the hunter back out, and
you'll never forget that experience.
No, that was an experience.
Yeah.
And Blaze was fine in the long run. He was fine, but just the sound of that horse crashing down the hill, it was terrifying.
Heart-wrenching too.
Yeah. That's the first instance of a horse going off the trail. And the second instance was when John was riding out, and he was riding my horse, Hellzapoppin, leading the pack horse. And he did what he always told everybody not to do. He had the lead rope to the pack horse over the saddle horn because he was taking his jacket off. And you never put the lead rope over the saddle horn.
Nope.
Because it can do exactly what it did. The horse got bounced off the trail when the pack hit a rock. So Sandpiper's going off the trail, and the lead rope has pinned John's leg to the saddle and pulled Poppin over backwards. So Sandpiper went tumbling down, then John went tumbling down, and every time he looked up, Poppin was coming down on top of him. And luckily, nobody was killed. John was pretty beat up, but the horses just had scratches. It was a miracle.
First time I've heard that story too.
Yeah.
Wow. And that was Hellzapoppin. That was
Hellzapoppin and Sandpiper.
Figure in your book. And Sandpiper both keep figures in that book. Yep. I can remember times up in the high country where we had incidences where once a horse that I had been riding, and it wasn't because the trail was unsteady, but we later found out they had a tumor in the brain. And it went a little nuts on me. This was a horse I had borrowed so that I could have two friends on my two horses. And that horse just up on this one part of the trail that was pretty narrow, and it had boulders all the way down to a river, just started going nuts on me, and then just jumped off the trail. And both of us went down that boulder fill. And I was pretty up high, hugging a boulder. I was surprised I didn't break any ribs, but the horse was pretty unscathed. It had some scratches on its leg, but I couldn't believe it didn't break its leg either, and that I was able to lead that horse back up that boulder field.
Yep.
But I didn't ride the horse afterwards. We decided to walk the horse down, back down the trail to have the vet look at them.
Well, John got those two horses. He had to go up that canyon to where the trail intersected, far up that canyon to get out. And he got them up there, and then he got back on and had to go past that same boulder again.
Oh,
that
really?
had knocked him off. And he was wondering, are they going to go past? Well, they did. And he came right out, but I was waiting for him on the desert and couldn't figure out why he was taking so long. And when he finally appeared, he just kind of slid off his horse. He had broken ribs. He had a compound fracture of his finger. He had a lot of injuries, but the horses just had scratches on them. it was just amazing.
And he had to endure that all the way down, all those injuries.
Yep.
One thing I wanted to mention in the last few minutes here on the show, it are all the outfitter groups that are available to contact in many different locations around the world. I loved hiring a couple of outfitters in Aspen area when I go back to visit my sister who still lives there. And there's one that's up in Old Snowmass that takes groups out for just a day ride up to Capitol Peak. It is like a total of 6 hours, ride. And I just love that one. And there's another one that goes up Independence Pass on the other side of Aspen. And those trails are steep like that. I mean, you just sheer drop-offs, and you are very, very careful on your horse, not to make that horse unsteady by moving around too much, make sure that you're one with that horse. But hiring an outfitter group is a fun way to do it. They supply the horses. You can look them up online, whatever location you want to go to. Some of the women here at the stables at the Sea Ranch talk about one called Honeywell that's up in right here in Northern California, I think over by Redding, but it's in the Sierra foothills.
Yeah.
And what about you? Did you ever do that before?
I've never gone to any others. A little interesting tidbit is there's a pack station called the Virginia Lakes Pack Station. It's up Virginia Lakes. It's up above Yosemite, and they go into the Yosemite area from the east side. The guy that owns that, his name's Matt Taylor, and he bought the old Halali Arabian Ranch in Willits. And so for several years, he's not there anymore, but for several years, he would bring all the mules from the pack station to winter there at the Halali Arabian Ranch. And we were the vet for him at that ranch. And so I got together with him and we talked pack station, and he invited me up to the Virginia Lakes. I've just never been able to go, but there's pack stations all up and down on both sides of the Sierras that you can look them all up. There's also a website called Owens Valley History that a man named Ray has put together that has, because he packed back in the 60s too, around Mount Whitney. And he lists all the pack stations that are there and stories from them. He's got stories from me on there. And so that's called Owens Valley History. It's a really fascinating site to go to.
I'm going to look that one up for sure. Owens Valley History.
Yeah.
And again, I'm going to mention Roni McFadden's book. This is Roni I've been talking with today, and it's The Longest Trail. The other one is Josephine. What the name of it again?
Josephine, A Tale of Hope and Happy Endings. Children's
book, and all the profits from that one go to the Seabiscuit Therapeutic Writing Center up at Ridgewood Ranch near Willits. And part of my documentary is going to be talking with some of the parents and children in the program. One of them, Roni, actually lives up by where you used to live by the Black Bart area.
Huh?
And so that is something we wanted to share with you today, were these stories about horses and packing into the mountains and the books that Roni has written, and I'm sure more to come. The Longest Trail is being made into a movie. We are quiet about what's happening there right now. But Roni, you're now up in Idaho. What's the name of the city again?
Hayden, Idaho. It's right next to Coeur d'Alene. So we're in North Idaho.
That's a beautiful area.
Trails up here are amazing.
And you still have your Appaloosa Romeo.
Yep.
And how much do you ride these days?
Well, before winter, a couple times a week, at least once a week, usually.
Yeah. Same here.
Yeah.
It's been a lot of storms. Well, thank you so much for coming on today with me again, Roni.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
All right. Well, take care. Best wishes to Romeo.
Okay. See you later, Leigh Anne.
See you later, Roni. And you are listening to KGUA in Wallala 88.3 FM. And speaking of Native Americans, we're going to be going to KUNM in Albuquerque, New Mexico, Native Voice One for Native America Calling for the next hour. And this is 88.3 FM, streaming at kgua.org. You can catch this show again today at 1 o'clock. You can also go to YouTube at any time and just type in KGUA. You'll go to our channel and you'll be able to watch the show too there. I'm Leigh Anne Lindsey. Thank you for listening. Thank you for joining us today. And they're going to be coming up in just a moment. It is 10 o'clock on Friday. It is Friday. Wow. Already end of the week, and it's Easter weekend. I really appreciate you all joining us today. And we will be back at 1 o'clock with this show. And you are, again, listening to KGUA in Wallala. It's Friday, April the 7th. Big weekend of events coming up. Shortly, Native America Calling will be joining us from New Mexico, and they'll have National Native News up first. And then we've got Big Picture Science. Here you go.